it a great song? I love it. It has such pride, such history to it, and we all recognize it as our national anthem. But where did it come from? What does it mean? Who wrote it? Paul Johnson, some of you know him here at church, he teaches here in town, and he has some real good insight on this particular song and the history on why it's so important to us. I want you to listen to what he has to say and really take in what it means and how it impacts us as Americans.
Hi, I'm Paul Johnson. I teach middle school social studies at Sauk Rapids Rice, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the War of 1812. Most of us know about the Revolutionary War that we fought against Britain to get our freedom and to become a country. But a lot of people don't know about the War of 1812. And so I thought, with it being the 4th of July, with us really thinking about our national pride, our patriotism, our flag, it'd be good to talk about the war in which the national anthem, the song that we sing that says, "We are Americans," where that came from. It came from the War of 1812, and the War of 1812, a lot of people just don't know about that war. But that war started because of what Britain was doing on the ocean, on the high seas. We, as a nation, were becoming more and more powerful. We wanted to become more and more of a major player in the world. We were trading with countries and nations throughout the world. What was happening, though, is as we were crossing the Atlantic to go and trade with places like Spain and Portugal and other nations, Britain was stopping our merchant ships. What they were doing is they were stopping our ships under threat of bombing them, coming onto the ship and saying, "Hey, wait a second, you are one of our soldiers, one of our sailors. You deserted, and we're bringing you back and making you work on our ship." Now, a lot of times, most of the time in fact, those people were not. They were actually American citizens, but the British were accusing them of being deserting sailors. Here we were. We didn't want to go to war. We were not a super powerful nation, and Britain had probably the most powerful navy in the world at the time. But we had to make a decision. Britain continued. We sent people to say, "Please stop doing this." Britain continued and continued and continued. We finally said, "That's it. We can't let this go on anymore," and we declared war on Britain. That war was fought on the oceans. That war was fought in Canada, which was controlled by Britain at the time. That war was fought here in the United States. In that war, we really were doing well for a while. We had control of the Great Lakes for a time. We were doing well on the ocean. We were fighting on our land. But unfortunately, right about the time we thought we had everything covered, Britain started to take the upper hand. Britain actually took over Washington, D.C., our capital. Britain burned our Capitol building. The British burned the White House. And from Washington, they were moving in towards Baltimore. Now, Baltimore was an amazingly important city. The United States at the time was really still right along the East Coast. We hadn't expanded too far to the west yet. So Baltimore would be cutting the United States in half. And what do you think is going to happen if the British are able to take control and cut the United States in half? Yeah, the United States is not going to be a one unified force. It's going to be two different groups that are going to be split by Britain. In fact, we believe that if Britain had been able to win at Fort McHenry and take over, that the northern states, the New England states as we know them today, probably would have seceded and tried to start their own country. Luckily for us, Britain did not succeed. They came in to attack Fort McHenry, which was at the mouth of Baltimore. Had they been able to take Fort McHenry, they would have been able to go right into Baltimore, set up camp, take over just like they had in Washington. Fort McHenry is the place that we get our national anthem. Fort McHenry was a major turning point in the War of 1812. You might know who Francis Scott Key is, but you might not. He is the man who is credited with writing the national anthem. However, when he wrote it, it was just a poem. Francis Scott Key was asked to go on to a prisoner of war ship to get the freedom of a man named Dr. William Beans. Dr. Beans had arrested two British soldiers who were in his town who were inebriated. He arrested them, one escaped. They went and got their soldier friends, came back and arrested Dr. Beans. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer who was asked to go ahead and try and negotiate the release of Dr. Beans. He got on the ship, negotiated that release, but the British wouldn't let him leave, even though he successfully got Dr. Beans released. See, they didn't want to let him go because they knew if they let him go, he had heard all of the secrets about how the British were going to attack Fort McHenry. So they kept him on, and he wound up sitting on that boat watching the bombardment of Fort McHenry. The British had a new weapon. They had a weapon that was a bomb, basically, that could shoot over 2.5 miles, and when it blew up, it sent shrapnel everywhere. Now this bomb, as it went through the sky, made a lot of noise, like a rocket, and it left a red streak, so it was that rocket's red glare. He watched this battle throughout the night, bombardment going back and forth from Fort McHenry, from the British ships into Fort McHenry, and at the end of the night, in the morning, when things went quiet, he looked up through the smoke and the mist and through the lightning day, and he saw a giant, huge American flag sitting above the fort. That flag was still flying, showing that the Americans had been able to defeat the British in this battle, push them back. The British had to give up because they figured out they just didn't have enough to take over Fort McHenry. While Francis Scott Key watched this, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old letter, and on the back of that letter, he wrote a poem. Now that poem is what we know today as our national anthem. It was a 4-stanza poem. We sing the first verse of it when we sing our national anthem. And he didn't intend to write the national anthem. He just wrote down what he saw that day. He brought it to his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law turned it into a newspaper. The newspaper published it. Several other newspapers all throughout the country published it later on. And about a month later, after it was first published, an actor put it to music, and he sang the song. Now, that song was our de facto national anthem until 1931, with by an act of Congress, it became our official national anthem that we sing at the beginning of football games, baseball games, all other sporting events, and it is that song that unifies us together as a nation.